Hi, and welcome to this presentation. I'm just going to get this going first and want to make sure everybody can see that.
Yes.
Okay, nice. It's like you're very small faces, all of you on my tiny screen. So thank you for having me. Today I'm going to be presenting the Williams and Russell project, which is a project that my company is leading as the development partner. And I look forward to hearing all your questions. So a little bit about me. My name is Anjale and I'm the founder and CEO of Audrey. We're a socially responsible real estate development company in Portland, Oregon. I have a long academic background, went to Cornell, MIT, and Harvard. I guess what's relevant to this group is that my degree at MIT was in urban planning, and my degree at Harvard was in landscape architecture. So I have a background kind of in environmental studies and then also those disciplines. I worked for 4 years as an urban designer before switching into real estate development. I don't normally get to talk about my past work, but my past urban design work was mainly doing master plans for downtown cities in the Caribbean. So Nassau, Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, all over. Started having clients in Atlanta where I lived. Worked on the Beltline project, which is a major urban intervention there. Had the Trust for Public Land, was working on acquiring some sites in relation to the Beltline project and started having developers as clients. And essentially, I was interested in sustainable development. My clients said they were too, but when it came down to it, they weren't. And so I kind of made the mental decision that I wanted to become the client, essentially become the developer who set the agenda when it came to sustainability, which I've always known it as melding both environmental sustainability and social equity and economic resilience. But that really hasn't been a thing so much in our industry. I would say since 2020, people have been more receptive to the social equity part of that equation. And I started my company in 2020, essentially to focus on social equity. I've done a lot of, super sustainable projects, obviously ones that make money or do benefit to the organization, but there aren't a lot of people in the United States doing projects that push the envelope when it comes to social equity. So started my company, Audrey. Part of the mission of the company is to essentially create best practices first of its kind in these areas, but also do knowledge sharing and thought leadership. I would say in that vein, I wrote a kid's book about real estate development, which introduces kids to the topic of development, but from the sustainability and equity lens. So I would love if all of you bought my book. That would be awesome. I was the former chair of the Oregon's Land Conservation and Development Commission at the state. So I was there 8 years and the last 3 years chair. And then I'm the former chair of the U.S. Green Building Council. I just ended a 5-year term with that. I'm also on 1803 Fund, their investment committee. So somewhere between movement of capital in relation to equity and sustainability and land use and green building. Okay, I'm gonna figure out how to let's do these slides on this presentation. There we go. So I'm here to talk about one specific project that my company is doing called the Williams and Russell Project. Our client on that project I'll talk about more is the Williams and Russell CDC, and I'll get into it. Um, just excuse me as I try to figure out how to get these. I'm on a tiny screen today, and so I'm trying to figure out how to get the little views out of my window. Are you seeing it still?
Yes.
Okay, you're still seeing it. Okay. So the Williams and Russell project, named after Williams and Russell Street, so it's in North Portland, essentially served as a center for the African American community in the 1940s to the early 1960s. The city condemned the site along with Emmanuel Hospital, which is now Legacy, in the 1970s as a part of the kind of urban renewal um, campaign that was done in the, I would say, historically Black community in Portland. I think many of you know because you're in this profession, this happened all over the United States, and this is kind of Portland's version of this. As a part of this, 36 businesses were displaced, 171 families, 74% of which were Black. And essentially through community pressure in 2017, Legacy Health and Prosper Portland agreed to convene what was called the Project Working Group, which was essentially a group of leaders in the Black community, nonprofit business, and other leaders. And there was a formal apology done as a part of that process from the city toward the community. And that group eventually formed a nonprofit called the Williams and Russell CDC, with 7 of the Project Working Group members being a part of that. They did an RFP in 2021 and selected my company and PCRI as development partners on the project. And then essentially from then till today, we've been doing a lot of different activities, which I can talk more about. I'm going to figure out how to change the slide. Uh-oh. Sorry, guys. I'm going to have to stop sharing and reshare. I'm normally on a big screen, so this is a little difficult. There we go. Part of the goals of the project are around wealth restoration in the community, given that that was what was stripped out from the community. So thinking about, and this was community input brought these to the forefront. So affordable housing, thinking about not just rental housing, but also home ownership, entrepreneurial training and support, considering that the economic engine, so this was the economic center of the community before it was torn down. So thinking about programs, services, and commercial spaces for Black businesses. Having gathering spaces for socializing. A lot of harm was done when this center was, this whole block was torn down. So bringing back the community to the block. What I failed to mention is when it was torn down in the 70s, essentially it was left as a blank piece of property for 50 years. So you can imagine taking something and saying, we're going to do a hospital on it, and then tearing down the buildings and then not doing anything for 50 years. What we didn't realize when we started the project until we got involved was that the land was severely contaminated also. So the buildings were imploded back into the ground, and they had paint shop, dry cleaner, just name your use. It was on the site, and it was put back into the ground. And then quality development, that these are sustainable, high quality, climate resilient buildings. A little bit about the team. The Williams and Russell CDC intentionally started with the idea that they would have certain groups of people on their board. So at least 2 of their members have to be from families who were displaced by the hospital expansion. At least 2 of them need to be Black business owners, and at least 3 of them need to represent community nonprofit organizations. This is currently, you can see the executive team at the top, and then you can see the board of directors below, which fits that mix that I was telling you about with regard to representing community. On the projects I'm talking to you about today, so that's the environmental remediation, the home ownership, and the business hub. My company is the developer for that. We're working with Colas Construction on the construction side. Lever Architecture is the architect. I think a lot of you probably know Chandra. She's spun off and started her own company, but she's still involved in the project. And then Hood Design Studio out of Oakland has been the landscape architect, along with Knott Studio, which is a local landscape architect. The project, it started off, I was like, it's 1 project, then it's 2 projects. I don't know how many projects I think this project is now. I would say 5 projects maybe. One is the environmental cleanup, which ended up being $8 million cleanup. And it was paid for essentially negotiating with the hospital to pay for it. The second project I would say is the affordable apartment project that my client is doing with another partner. The third project is the affordable homeownership project, which we're doing and it's under construction. And then the business hub project is a project that we're doing and we are still fundraising for that and finishing up design. And then the cultural plaza is almost like its own project in the sense that we need to find funding specifically for that. As a part of the getting back the land, this northern part, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in the bottom right-hand corner where you see grass, that is also a part of the land that the nonprofit got back from Legacy.
Nice.
My client has talked a lot about what reparative development is, and really thinking about development that seeks to right a wrong or heal damage that was caused by past policies and projects. And first being the idea that a formal acknowledgement or apology is needed to kind of do this work, and that was done by Mayor Wheeler at the city. And then the idea that you can't undo the harm that was done. If you think about all of the economic development that would have happened on that site up until today, you can't replicate that by doing a new building project. So the building project's really trying to be forward-looking, and really thinking about what a prosperous future could be, and heal some of that hurt. But obviously, the magnitude of that can't be done on one development site. So the first project I was going to talk about was the affordable homeownership project. And so we have 20 homes, missing middle homes. We have 24 units because 4 of those homes have an accessory dwelling unit as a part of it. And really thinking about between 60% and 120% AMI when it comes to affordability. They're both 2 and 3 bedroom homes. Like I said, some of them have that additional unit on the ground floor. Worked with the city to get down payment assistance that would come to the buyers of these homes. Uh, did an extensive process, which I'll show on another slide, of talking to folks before this. So this was very much a community-led design in that case. Some of the things I would say that we were looking for in this project was really thinking about doing what we called a single family like project. So taking the qualities of a single family home, but putting it into a townhouse setting. So that includes larger units, private outdoor gardens, the sense of privacy, some of the things that you would get if you had a single family home. We're going for Earth Advantage Platinum. Like I said, it's under construction, and you can go by there and see it today. Part of the process, when I started my company, I knew I wanted to do home ownership that was targeted toward Black community members. And so essentially did a home buyer preference survey with what was known as Portland Housing Center. They just recently changed their name to Arrive. And essentially, they have a lot of people who are interested in homes. I wanted to do homes. And the question is, what are there preferences that Black homeowners have? And so we essentially did the surveys like location, amenities, all these things, and took all that knowledge when we won this RFP to essentially design it with what people want. After that time, we essentially did a bunch of community design focus groups, all the way from like, is this unit mix right? Do you like the layout of this thing? All the way down to literally like, what color would you like to see the outside of the building? So this was kind of a series of workshops. Um, what what we're doing as far as marketing and sales is working with the city and their preference policy list of people. And so those are folks that either lived in the neighborhood themselves or as kids or as adults, and essentially have ties to the neighborhood and were displaced as a result of that. And there's a points-based system that the city has that kind of rank people higher in the list based on how much impact was created for their family. And so those are the folks that we're going to be opening up these homes to buy, is folks that are on the preference policy list. So I think our last sessions that we did were literally with folks that are on that list. And I just thought I'd throw in a couple slides about like what I was talking about. We did surveys to say like, what do you think about this scheme versus that scheme versus that one? So that gives you a sense. We did that for the backyards, different configurations of the backyards. We did that for the interior color scheme. We did it for the exterior. And that was like the last session we did. Prior to that, we did that as far as floor plans. Which one would you like? How much could you afford? So a lot of information was gathered. And I would say that the project design changed substantially during that time. I would say there were probably 3 completely different iterations of it, all with the same 20 units, but there was almost like a condo stacked version. Then there was the side-by-side version, substantially changed based on feedback. Also, what was interesting was based on floor plan, how much of a mix of these different units were you going to have? How much of the mix of the different backyard options are you going to have? How many are going to have blue versus green? So we didn't pick the winner. We actually took the percentages, and some of them are blue, some of them are green, some of them are the plum color based on the surveys that we did. So it's an interesting way to try to get to a custom house without each house being custom, if that makes sense. The development cost of the project, 16.4 million. I don't think this is all the list of the folks that funded this project, but I thought I'd throw on a bunch so you could see. I think there's 11 sources of funding in the project. Some of them are like state, Portland Clean Energy Fund. This is, like I said, it's going for, and I have a slide at the end that talks about it in more detail, but it's going for Earth Advantage Platinum certification. Almost all of these homes are net zero. So if you average them all together, this is essentially a net zero project. I think 4 of them, the ones with ADUs, I think are not net zero, but the rest are. As we mentioned, Legacy Health, congressionally directed spending, Meyer Memorial Trust, Oregon Community Foundation, City of Portland, and then our lender is On Point Community Credit Union. And so this is a slide that's more talking about both of the housing unit projects together. So the idea is not just affordable apartments by themselves, but also co-locating it with culturally responsive services in the apartment case, also business services in the business building. Thinking about a diversity of housing, right? We got apartments on the site, we got townhomes, we got ADUs. Family size homes was definitely like a preference and a thought because that's what's missing from the market. Like the regular market rate developer is not going to produce those homes at the price point that is needed. And then thinking about areas that we can bring in ADA accessible housing. That's one of our ideas for the ADU units is to essentially make some of them, you know, you can have a family member living with you and they have an accessible unit, which is not typical, right, in townhouse development. Resilient housing, so being responsive to climate change, we've seen a lot of events happen where lower income community members essentially don't have air conditioning, don't have certain things when major events happen, don't have clean air. So thinking about how the buildings can be resilient to that. And then obviously healthy buildings, superior indoor air quality, healthy materials, and superior insulation. The second project I was going to talk about is the Business Hub project. The intent behind the building is to have a space where, like, if you wanted to start a business, people would be like, go to that building, right? Business events, go to that building, like an identifiable, well-designed, community-centric space, but associated with business creation and support and increasing people's economic well-being. So the idea that there would be workforce training and education, could there be co-working space? Is there a business accelerator? And really thinking about affordable office and retail space as an important part of that. Also trying to think about how to bring in the connections between youth and professionals. And that's where the idea of this identifiable building where programs can happen is important. I think what's tragic in many cases when it comes to the awesome work that many nonprofits do is that, you know, a lot of the buildings they're in are just awful buildings. And in my personal opinion, that then starts to reflect on the people being served, right? If you're like, okay, this organization served me, now I'm going into this falling apart, whatever building, that says something about your value and your self-worth. Versus if you came to an amazing building where the workers are happy because they're living, you know, working in this amazing building, and then you're feeling like you're valued and served. So I personally feel that there's a strong correlation between community benefit and good design and good buildings. And a lot of times, as you know, the material cost is material cost, right? And you could slap up the materials and they could look great. You could take the same materials and it looked bad. So a lot of times people see buildings that I work on, they're like, oh my God, that's so expensive. And it's like, look at the material. You know, sometimes it can be just hardy and hardy siding and metal siding, very simple materials, but when it's well designed, takes on a whole different viewpoint. Um, LEED Gold is what we're going for in this project. We will have parking underground. Part of the remediation essentially required us to take out about 12 to 15 feet of soil underground. And so if you go by the site right now, you'll be like, why is there a big pit there?
Yeah.
We looked at where the environmental contamination was most and also where we were placing the buildings. And essentially the business hub with its underground parking is placed where the most digging had to happen. And so that hole that's been left there is the soil that's been carried out, but it's also the future underground parking for that. This is a $37.8 million project. Part of the community benefits of this project is achieving below market rents for small and emerging businesses, creating a Black community focused third space, obviously delivering energy efficient and climate friendly centered space, And then really thinking about this kind of systematic injustices against the Black community is specifically, right, the site. Some people are like, oh, could you do this somewhere else? It's like, not really, because of the emotional, the memories that were at the site. This site has been very central. It was also, I failed to mention, the center for the city of Albina before, it got brought into the city of Portland. This was the commercial center. So it has a history that predates the Black community being in that area also. And then the organization, the Williams and Russell CDC, has been very great and intentional about direct input from Black community members, all the way from when it was a project working group. I don't know if any of you followed that time period, but during that time period, all of their meetings were public. So it was a very transparent, open process. And since we've started this development project, we've had numerous and multiple community meetings, not trying to be generic, trying to be really specific, like you saw in the homeownership one. It's like, not, what do you want on the site? No, that has already been solved in other instances. Now we're sitting here talking very specifically about this building. So each project, and including the cultural plaza in the middle, has had its own version of like what is needed for the community to um, give input on specific to that project. $37.8 million project. Some of the funders, Prosper Portland, like I said, congressionally directed spending. It got a Wood Innovations grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Mar Memorial Trust, Portland Clean Energy Fund, and then the state of Oregon lottery funds. One thing I didn't talk about here is the cultural plaza. Like I said, I've been sort of viewing it as its own project, even though it is part of the block that this is on. Urban design wise, sorry, rewind. Urban design wise, the way that this was designed was to essentially, it's one parcel of land, and it was designed to be divided into, essentially we created 3 parcels with the idea that each project, it would be designed to look like it all works together when it's done, but that each project could move completely independent of the other without being dependent on the other one. And so when I started the project, I couldn't have told you which project was going first or second. I was like, I don't know. To my surprise, the homeownership is going first, which most people would think maybe that was last, but it ended up being first. The business hub we think will be second, and then we think the apartments will be third. Also, the way the cultural plaza is situated, I don't want to get to this point, but if we don't have the money for that, we could potentially put grass there and then fundraise more and then come back and build that cultural plaza. So it's been very intentional about how things are placed and how, from the development point of view, they can move forward independently. I would say it's been helpful that I have an urban design background. And then I know the real estate to be able to think about both urban design and real estate simultaneously. I think when we started, we didn't have a landscape architect, so I was like de facto urban designer at the very beginning of this project. Sustainability. So I think some of the things I've said are kind of obvious, but remediating a severely environmentally contaminated site is a big deal. All the buildings will go from some sort of environmental certification. I'm a big believer in certification because otherwise I don't believe you or what you're doing if you don't have a certification. Path to net zero, we follow on all of the projects. Solar energy generation, I failed to mention this, but it's on the bottom there. My company won an Energy Trust of Oregon Net Zero Fellowship, and essentially we were studying district systems for equity-centered development. And so we essentially use this site as a research project to be like, can we create a microgrid on the site? So can we do net zero energy, net zero water, and net zero trash? And it was great to be able to take that money and explore this concept to its fullest and not think like, are we going to do that on the project or not? Just be like, this is a research project. And we essentially got to a point, and you can find that online, all the material of that. It's very dense. I mean, in a good way. We got to the point where we could imagine a microgrid, but we also got to what are the challenges to pulling it off, and then what are the policy changes that need to happen, mainly on the utility side to make that happen. And because I'm in the kind of you know high levels of environmental sustainability world, in my mind, I was just like, oh, microgrid, whatever. And then the electrical engineer was like, this is the first time I've ever been able to actually do these conceptual things on an actual site with an actual client with actual constraints and all that. I was like, wow, I didn't know I thought we were more advanced than that. So I was
Right.
very excited to do that. I don't think we'll be doing a microgrid on the site, but the ability to advance the industry in that regard was important to me. We're using cross-laminated timber on the Business Hub project, so that's why I got that Wood Innovations grant. Um, Portland Clean Energy Fund is going to help us get as close to net zero as we can on those various projects. And then really at the end of the day, you could have your angle about we do this for the environment or whatever angle you have. When it comes to equity and reparative development, really we're looking at this as a way to bring reduced utility costs to the residents and the businesses. So this is almost like a long-term endowment toward their future finances, but through an environmental lens.
Mm.
And then on the social equity part, obviously you saw the diversity of the leadership team. That's unheard of, right? As you can imagine in development projects throughout the United States. So that in and of itself is noteworthy. And then having a deep commitment to engaging diverse consultants through development, leasing, asset management. 100% of the dollars, that go to construction, Cola's Construction is their contractor on all the projects. It's a Black-owned firm. We have a goal in our company of at least 30% of all the dollars that flow through a project going to women, BIPOC, or emerging small businesses. Programming, the Williams Russell CDC, they're the long-term property owner of the Business Hub and have a stake in the apartment building, and really thinking about them being on site also with the cultural plaza, thinking about culturally specific services, programs that, what's the life besides the real estate of these projects. As I mentioned, the housing sales, but also the leasing for the apartment building will follow the northeast preference policy, which I mentioned, which uh, creates opportunity to folks that were displaced from the community. And then the idea of continual community benefit through the lens of real estate. In the kind of knowledge share, part of the things that my company does very specifically is to think about industry change, inspiration for other projects. And these happen in kind of three different buckets. One is on the education front, one is on the innovation front, and the other one is on arts and culture. And I would say on the education front, we partnered with the National Association of Minority Architects to essentially host their student design competition. I should have put the year down because time flies, and now I'm like, what year was that? Maybe 2 years ago. What was super cool was I think there were like 30 teams from around the US that came up with their own version of what should be on the Williams and Russell site with the same brief that we had when we did this project. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, Bryson, who's the president of the Williams and Russell CDC, he's checking out one of the models. So they had like all the models set up and they had judges, and the judges didn't know what school anybody was from. So it was kind of like a mystery about like what school was going to win. Um, and super Cornell ended up winning, which I totally remember because I'm Cornell. I was not one of the judges. I was not one of the judges. But it was just really great because they had models. I think they had renderings, obviously, and I think they had video too. And so you can go to their website and click on every single team and see their version of the site. So what's really unique about that is to be able, it's very rare for a professional working in this field to get a brief so awesome as this project. And so we want to make sure to pass that on to the next generation that they can also have a brief this awesome on a project. There's so many more things I could talk about, but I am going to leave it up for questions and answers. I went faster than I imagined. Thank you.
That was very
Oh,
fast.
yeah, yeah, really great. Fiona, are there some questions coming in here?
Yeah, I was gonna say, folks will go ahead and queue up any questions. I'm gonna start with David's. Let's see, David asked, just of all the investors and funding, I think you said you had 11 sources. Just if you could kind of qualify which of those are kind of three strong partners that have been with you maybe for a long time, and any separate from that, just any lessons for this groundbreaking project.
Yeah.
Lessons learned.
Um, it's interesting funding nowadays. Like a lot, I've presented this project at the National ULI conference, and folks were really interested in like, where'd you get this funding from? How did you pull this off? And at the end of the day, I would say all the projects that we're working on now as a company are just like when we start, I have no clue how it's going to get done. Let's just be honest. They're high vision projects. You got a motivated team. We're going to figure it out. And I would say every single project is just figuring that junk out. And so when you say like, do I have any repeat ones? It's like maybe for this time period, but then that funding source goes away and now we have to figure out some new ones. So, I mean, Oregon Housing and Community Services is definitely like the state, funding affordable housing projects. So that's a given that you would go to the state for money. City of Portland is in the same regard. I think there were other PCEF, Portland Clean Energy Fund, is a relatively new funding source, and we actually were one of the first grants to receive that funding for the Business Hub project. And so we've been through various iterations depending on our project on that. So right now, I would say that's a good source to go to for nonprofit organizations who have community benefit. Congressionally directed spending is an on and off thing in the sense that depending on what administration, are they having it or not having it? So I think government-wise, those are good sources. I think there got to be a lot more interesting creative things when it came to like actually negotiating with Legacy to give money, right, for the cleanup. We did have a thing that not necessarily for the homeownership project, for the site in general, where we negotiated with the power company because they wanted some things and we wanted some things, so we got some money from them. It was interesting. On Point Community Credit Union hadn't really done a project like this before. They're kind of going more into the commercial lending space, so helping them work out these initial things that now will open the gate for other folks that they can lend to. So that's interesting to be with a bank that hadn't done this really yet. That's a new thing. But I think the moral of the story on the funding is every project is like by any means necessary. We're going to figure out how to make this project go. And I think the vision of the project and the tenacity and grit of the team and the belief, everybody has to believe that we're doing this. That's really how we pull off. Because if you just looked on face value and said, you're trying to do this project in this time period, people would just say like, oh, that's not happening. That's not possible. And that's all of my projects, I would say.
Yeah.
What was the second part of that question? There was a second part.
Yeah, it was a
Wait,
great.
I was saying the lessons learned from trying to stack, the investments necessary. So you just answered it, Anjali.
Okay.
Thank you. It felt like it's really sort of one off, and having some experience in the East Coast where the struggle is that gap that nobody's used to doing. Hearing a bank actually sort of leaning in is exciting, and hopeful for going forward in redevelopment.
Yeah, and we did a super cool panel with the Oregon Impact Roundtable, which if you're interested in like finance and financial activism, I would suggest attending some of their events, where we got all the lenders, Prosper, we got On Point, and we got the equity investor. I forgot to mention the Portland Housing Center, which is now called Arrive. They are actually the equity investor. And so that I would say that's creative in the sense of thinking. I was talking to an external equity investor from the East Coast who cares a lot about this type of project, so very values aligned, but they don't know Portland. They're thinking of all the risks, what they should do in an equity investor position. And after talking a bunch to them, I was like, wait, wouldn't it be great if the equity investor is also the person bringing the buyers? Because now we've kind of closed the loop. Because the equity investor is going to be like, where are these buyers coming from? Are we going to ensure that we can sell these?
Yeah.
Portland Housing Center, now called Arrive, is the manager of the preference policy on behalf of the city of Portland. And so the idea that they're also funneling buyers toward not just this project, all the other projects, they're showing buyers the opportunities. And then they're also the equity investor. They're motivated, right, to sell. The equity investor is also motivated to make sure the home sells. So that's some of the creativity, I would say. So I think there are things about it that another project and wherever could learn from and pick from, but the actual mix and flavor obviously is hyper specific, like most real estate.
Awesome. David, did you want to ask your part two of that question?
Oh, no, I have another question, but what do we got in the list there?
I'm intrigued by Catherine's question. I had the same thought just looking at the map. Catherine asked about the lots just to the north. believe those are maybe also owned by Legacy historically.
Yeah, so
Could you
just
talk
north of the
briefly?
site is a parking lot and a blank piece of land. That blank piece of land is now owned by the Williams and Russell CDC.
Oh,
And so that would be, and most people didn't know that because that was part of the negotiation. It just can't, part of the negotiation was getting that piece of land. Um, it also has environmental contamination issues. And so we've been doing due diligence on that to figure out what the magnitude of it is. We've also done explorations on potential options. Is that an expanded part of the homeownership? Is like phase two homeownership? Is it some other community need? Um, the parking lot is still owned by Legacy, so it's only the the grass. But yeah, I think if it ends up being part two of the home ownership, it'll probably start after the homes are sold. Or if it ends, it could end up being something different based on like what the community needs start to be at that time.
it sort of segues into that question from Emmy Day. Uh,
Yeah,
you know,
Emmy asks, you've addressed housing and jobs for this project. Curious about food for more livable communities. Are there plans for something like a community market, food hub, or park that builds some of that food resilience for the neighborhood?
It's funny that you said that because I almost said that when I was talking about the North Parcel, or it could be a food like a mini grocery store, because that is one of the things that my client has been floating. Uh, what I didn't mention about the business hub is how we're thinking about potentially the ground floor. We're talking about a cafe or coffee shop kind of being at that corner. Then for the bulk of it, we're talking about potentially being multiple vendors with their goods being sold in that. And then the third kind of retail space, we've tossed around a bunch of different things. Could it be a bakery? Could it be like a meat, like where you can buy meat, like a deli? Is that a cafe? So is that a small, like bringing in goods? There's a lot of Black farmers that have goods, and we bring in fresh produce into that kind of for community to buy at like a reduced price, but like organic, healthy food. So I think part of that, and a little bit of like a smaller scale, is being thought of for the bottom of the business hub building. And then there have been talks, but no decisions at all about the north parcel. And could there be a food component? We have been thinking about the cultural plaza being set up in such a way where you could put in tents and vendors and have like a mini farmers market. I would say mini, or any outdoor events, associated community level events. But a lot of our time has been thought about, is that cultural plaza for this new community that's been built primarily, or is it for trying to draw people from the outside inside? And the tension, I would say, between that, not in a bad way, but like which one are we doing? Um, what I should show you, tell me if you can see that. Can you see that?
yes.
Okay,
Yep, purple door.
let's see if this works. No, it doesn't. Trying to go backwards. Um, what I there's different versions of this, so depending on what version you see, you might not see this, but this is the latest version. You can see that there's this whole roof deck, occupiable roof deck. So it's almost doubling the amount of open space on the site, because you can see down here is this cultural plaza and then this. So we've been talking about what activities, community-centered activities are going to happen at this upper level. What's going to happen at the lower level. And then we've also, and then, privacy versus activity, right? How do it has it want to skew in that way? We've also talked about art and storytelling being a part of both those spaces. Is there some narrative? Is there some sculpture as a part of that? And so part of our calling is to try to go out for funding that's interested in that, in putting those story. People need to know the story of the site and the people that were here and all the things that went into it. So these are two opportunities to tell those stories. Also, are there opportunities to tell stories about environmental sustainability in relation to this? Because what you can't see in this slide is this line here, the roof slopes behind it, and all of that is solar. So solar is going to be really visible on the site from that viewpoint. If you go by the site right now and you look, you're like, wow, there's a lot of roof area. That's all going
Yeah,
to be solar.
that's great.
Awesome. And not to stick on too many of David's questions, but just while we have this visual up, I think it's helpful to talk through. Just could you talk a little bit about like public access through the site? Looks like maybe there was a historic street vacation or kind of how you're thinking about
Yeah.
permeability.
This is a super block, and this Knott Street here, you can see my cursor, right?
Yes.
This part of Knott Street's not actually a public road, even though people drive through it. It's a private road. And so when we first started the project, I was very convinced we're turning back into a public road until I found out what that entails. And I was like, forget that. We're not doing that. So it's going to be a private street. However, as a part of the breaking up the super block thing that the city requires, there's a multi-use path that had to be put in. So kind of where my cursor is, there's this new path with lighting, et cetera. So that will be a way to kind of go through this super block. We've had a lot of conversation about, you can enter the interior of the site through here and here. We've had a lot of conversations like, is that like a low gate? Is it gated? We have an arch here that's super cool that you go through. Is it closed at the end? Is it open at a certain time? We don't have a formal decision on that yet. I think from an urban design perspective, there's some positives about safety and security. There's some positives about permeability. And then there's some positives about security. So the eyes on the street, I think, are the most important parts, and the tension between, you want people to feel like they can get out easily, but then you don't want just people wandering around. I think the setup of this very much shows it as a space for this community, and then people being invited in to the space. I would say the design setup demonstrates that. And I would say the way that people will be invited in is really through this arch here. And that arch, when you go through that space, that's how you enter this business building. And so you could imagine programming. I wish I had more pictures of this building, but we haven't really released all the pictures. This is like a porch, essentially. So the concept of a porch, and it's elevated from the street at the corner. So you can imagine people sitting along this porch. You can imagine seating inside this like kind of hallway that leads to this cultural plaza. So really creating these interstitial spaces that you don't traditionally, like if you just said like office building or commercial building, it's just like box, and door. This is creating all of these thresholds and spaces that people can inhabit and enjoy and happen to run into somebody, and the kind of spaces we actually like to be in.
Awesome. I thought I read the project won a Business Oregon grant recently too for infrastructure costs. Hopefully that helps offset some of this.
Yeah, and I didn't include that in this because that was more associated, like there was not street improvements that we had to do, and getting at it's that money spans across different projects. I guess I would say it has some benefit to the apartments, some to the homeownership, etc.
Great. All right, I'm gonna hop over to Jess's question. Jess is interested about your social equity metric that you mentioned last week as part of Climate Week. Are there other aspects of the potential assessment framework that this project doesn't hit? What more could you want to see beyond all of the really admirable social equity features that you've shared?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what metric was I talking about. I think I was talking about on that panel about something that I had worked on trying to advance as far as a scorecard, if that's what I talked about at that event, which I have been interested in a while. And then when I started my company, I started to research to be like, does somebody else have that scorecard? I did find somebody who has an equity-centered scorecard, which is the SEAM certification, SEAM. I actually, well, I don't know if I want to say this at this forum. I actually asked them if they would let this be a pilot and not have me pay, so I could test out their model, but they weren't into that. Otherwise, I might have tried to go for SEAM certification, I guess is the point. With all of the things that we do, I'm trying to be at the leading edge of them. And so I'd say part of it is inventing things as we go along. Like we start a project, we're like, I don't know what we're going to do. And then halfway through, we're like, oh, we're doing a partnership with NOMA and a student design competition. I could not have said that at the beginning of the project. And so I think it's assembling a group of people in the folks that work for the company that care about these issues and can come up with these ideas as we go along. And also our client is coming up with some of them and really thinking about who do we know and partnership. People will approach us, say, hey, you want to do something? We're like, yeah, let's do. And actually, right next to me is a Jefferson High School student who's shadowing me this week from the ACE mentorship program. So that's an example of like, I did not know that was happening until, they approached me and said, hey, you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, sure. So there are certain things, I wish I had the diagram, but I don't have it, where on all of our projects, we're doing environmental, equity, economic resilience, and then good design. That's a core. We're going to do that. And then we have these other things we call initiatives, which I told you were around innovation, education, and arts and culture. And a lot of the interesting equity metrics or stories or where you want to say can a lot of times happen on those other things. And those are the ones I was telling you, I don't know what I'm doing until we get there. And so an example of that is the first project for the company to complete was Parrot Creek, which was a residential treatment facility for teenage boys. When we started the project, I didn't know that we were going to do this 3-part studio series where me and the landscape architect taught a studio at Harvard on trauma-informed design. The architect taught a studio at University of Oregon on the same topic, and then 2 of our employees who started this organization called Your Street, Your Voice, we're going to do essentially design workshops with the youth at the facility. I would call that an equity expression. Didn't know we were going to do that till we decided we're going to do that. So I don't actually have, besides a basic, you know, oh, I should have, there's so many slides I could have shown you. There is something around equity. Sorry, I forgot this. When I started the company, I said, I want to do equitable development. And everybody's like, what is that? And I was like, created a slide, which I don't have here, but it basically said who owns the land, who develops it, who designs it, who builds it, who owns it. And in each of those columns, there is a racist legacy in the United States with regard to each of those topics, like you can't own land and you can't be in design school and, and so on and so, you don't have money, so you can't, the banks won't lend to you. And so for each one of those, the idea is that there's a potential solution. And the idea would be like, that'd be lovely if all of our projects did all of those. Understanding that this project might be really good on who owns the land, but not so good on who designs a building, for example, or who owns it at the end is important, but who, gives money to is a different thing. So kind of use that framework and thinking about this is what we're going for is thinking about the who at every case. And really that's thinking about the benefits of real estate development and who do those benefits accrue to from both the financial business point of view, but also from the ownership at the end and the who does it serve point of view. So I would say that's our general checklist. If we have a checklist, that's our general checklist. And then we have all these initiatives that kind of arise as we go along.
Anjali, will it's David. Will Russell CDC own and operate the hub building?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they, Portland Housing Center, now called Arrive. I just want to say that because most people know they just changed their name like last week. They and the Williams Russell CDC are the owners of the homes before they sell. Then each individual, there will be an HOA and the homeowners will own that. They will be the owners of the business hub. And then them, along with their other partner, will be the owners of the apartment building.
Oh, okay.
Brian was curious, what's the status of the apartment building? I know you mentioned the other 2 are going to go first.
Yeah, because it's not my project, I don't have the very specifics on that, unfortunately. But I do know that they've been seeking funding at the city level and at the state level to get that project done. So they have a year in which they imagine to be complete. But anybody who's following apartments projects knows that there was an issue at the state with running out of low-income housing tax credit opportunities. And so essentially, apartment projects have formed this really long line that everybody's stacked up in. And so I think, and I hope this is right when I'm saying this, no project's getting any money, I think, until 2027 if you're not already like getting it now. Yeah. So they're in that line of projects to get money.
Great. Patty had a question about the business hub. Just basically, how does the development cost square up with the proposed retail? Maybe I'll just read this question.
Yeah.
How can the square foot cost of the business hub building support proposed retail?
As far as the affordable retail, making it affordable, is that the question?
Is there longer term kind of subsidy planned?
Yeah, so there's the cost of the building, which is the uses, and then there's the where you get your money from, which is the sources. Pretend you got 100% grant financing for all of it, right? Then all organization at the end of the day would have to do to own and operate is the operating cost, right? The more debt you have on a project, obviously the more money you have to make because you have to not only pay that mortgage or that debt service, but you also have to make extra than that, right? As a buffer, the banks require you to have a buffer. Both this project, the business hub, and the affordable home ownership, the intent with the business hub is not to burden the project with so high of a loan that now they're forever have to get high rents or forever have to worry about losing the building to the bank, right? And so in order to do that is to essentially get more grant funding. So a traditional market rate real estate development project might have 70% debt and 30% equity. All of the projects that I'm working on with my company essentially flip that, where the equity is the majority, which is in this case grants that they get, and the debt is the smaller one. Allowing that essentially like a Prosper Portland putting money into this, essentially they're subsidizing the long-term affordability of the project, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure
And it's
does.
taken some of our public partners to kind of like wrap around that because in the apartment world or the housing world, that's very easily done and understood. I think it's harder in the commercial space because people are just like, either somebody's 100% grant funding and that's what they're doing. And this is almost like a hybrid between them because it's taking these market rate sensibilities. However, we're getting people to buy, essentially invest and buy down that affordability in the long term. So the organizations each of these organizations can be in this new building without, I mean, they can't pay market rate rent, right? But the co-location, I think, is probably the one of the most important parts because you get these organizations. What I forgot to mention is Williams and Russell CDC is not filling this whole building with themselves. I should have mentioned that. They're going to be one small tenant in this building. And the idea is to bring in all these other different partners who offer business workshops, somebody who's interested in helping business owners with the podcasting and web development, whatever, so that you could have this ecosystem of organizations that support business creation. And you would want it to be accessible to those organizations so that they can co-locate together.
Awesome.
Cool. I have a
There's
quick question to jump in, Fiona, is that the Williams and Russell CDC building is across the street and on the corner there, right? Annulate. Is there any plans for that building going forward?
Oh, are you saying this building here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so that's not Williams Russell CDC is not
Okay.
affiliated with that building. Yeah. That used to be the home of the Urban League.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Are there any plans for that building right now? Are they sort of involved at all?
they're not involved. No, the Urban League is not involved with our project. Yeah. I think they have hopes for that site.
Okay.
There is a site here that is planned to be a multifamily housing project. I don't know when it's starting, a market rate one. So I think that's a change we know that's supposed to happen. And then for folks that know, the new Albina library is just like 2 blocks over, and Matt Dishman swimming pool is just like 1 block over. So this is it was like we were kind of well into the project where I had this moment where I was like, this is a perfect place to live as a kid. Because you got all these, schools that are nearby, so the idea that the focus was on family size unit, I think is great. And there's a community garden that's just across the way, and yeah, really good things happening.
Will the debt approach to the apartments also help for larger apartments, more bedroom apartments? Is that a goal or a thought?
Yeah, the approach to that project is larger family size units. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. And that has been a goal, I think, in the city for a while, just because the market will always, if you do market rate stuff, it'll always tend toward the studios and the ones.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of families that can't find
And that's
housing.
naturally occurring in the neighborhood, there's a 30 unit that's a 3-story that just went up on Graham Street. Uh, it's happening at that small scale for lots of sort of young folks coming out of the nest is what it appears like anyway in those
Yeah.
lofts. Quaylen had a question there. Quaylen Carter says, what's the name of the gathering for lenders you mentioned that included On Point and Prosper Portland?
Yeah, it was Oregon Impact Roundtable. Oregon Impact Roundtable. Am I missing something? Capital. I'm missing the word capital. Oregon Impact Capital Roundtable. And they have if you look on LinkedIn, that's sort of where they have their thing. They can find out about events. Prosper and OnPoint aren't a part of that organization necessarily. I just did a panel talking about this project more from the finance point of view, and I had them there, and it was like a panel where people were asking like, why did you invest in this project? So it's a group. The group was formed by a couple alumni from the Just Economy Institute, which is a fellowship for financial activists. And I just became a graduate of that myself. I just finished the fellowship in June. And they had approached me prior to me actually going and doing the fellowship to have a speaker who wrote this book, which I highly recommend, called The Financial Activist Playbook.
Hmm.
Jasmine Rashid. And so she came to Powell's bookstore. And I guess the Oregon Impact Capital Roundtable had been an organization prior to COVID, but COVID kind of made them, everybody stopped. And that event kind of brought them back. And so I've been going to kind of their mixers and stuff like that. And so it's great because it's like a bunch of people that care about these issues, but in relation to finance and money.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's always a bit of a challenge. We're getting down to the last 2-minute warning here.
Yeah.
Fiona,
And
you seem really good.
I had a question, just kind of moving forward once this project is built. What do you envision the relationship between legacy and the project or the residents moving forward?
That's a deep question.
Are
I could
there,
imagine definitely from the user point of view is the apartments being attractive to folks that work at the hospital. So I could definitely see those linkages. Um, I don't know if there will be any long-term
like
organizational.
job training, workforce
Yeah,
opportunities?
I don't know. It's not in the books right now for the building. So yeah, their proximity, I think also the proximity for employees to come over and patronize the stores and stuff like that. I mean, that's a large amount of people there. So I think that will be good for those businesses that are there. But yeah, as far as relationship with the organization, I think my client would have to speak to that.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
we're
I
one
think
minute out. Yeah,
they've
go ahead,
been,
David.
yeah, I was going to say it's pretty obvious they've been positive up until this point in sort of partnering in the development and working with you. It appears to be in a very positive fashion. So we hope for the best on that. We got the book. The book is in there. Sorry,
Yes, I put
sorry.
the book.
Someone's
But
just come.
to end the legacy one, it was a tough negotiation to get to the
Okay,
point. I'm not going to pretend
I see.
it was
That's
not
that's
it it
it's
was
good for
not
us to all
yeah.
hear that. We're all professionals on this call, and
Yeah.
can immediately imagine that. I'm sort of impressed you got the yes, because that would be a big corporate thing, and sleeping there for 50 years. So way to
Yeah.
wake that up and make something
Yeah.
happen, Anjali. We're
And I would say two parts. One is to
yeah,
get the land. The other one was to get the money to remediate the land. Two
yeah,
different,
yeah.
equally difficult negotiations.
I
Well
see. Thank
done.
you for making that clear. Appreciate it. Um, So somebody rode their bike by yesterday and they're very stoked to see this coming to
Yay.
life. And Courtney Skyback says it's a fantastic project. Looking forward to watching how this site develops. We want to say, if you've got any last words, this is kind of it. We kind of close up here shop at 1 o'clock. Anjali,
Yeah, I would just say, for all the folks involved in this type of work, we're the change, right, that we want to see. And so I think each of us has a part to play in advancing our industry. And I would just encourage all of you not to think of this work as like separate from what you do, but to say like, how can I think of some of these concepts and incorporate them, even if they're tiny, into the work, because this is how we make change.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having
Well,
me.
it's been fantastic. And So glad you could get here in July, which is sometimes a little quiet, but we got a big turnout today. So hopefully the word's getting spread further and further. I think everybody really enjoyed it. Anjali, thank you so much for attending. And like I said, the panel is a platform for yourself and others pursuing this work here in Portland to come back and show it off as much as possible. So with that, I'm going to say thanks, everybody. We're working on some ideas for September and August, and I'm going to put some announcements out. But we know we've got OMSI coming in October, so we're filling in the gaps between that. Stay tuned. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great day and a great week. Thank you again, Anjali.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.